the only person who escapes the grim law of enantiodromia, is the one who can face his unconscious not by repressing it, but by setting it before him as what he is not. Suguru Geto is without a doubt one of the most complex and well-written characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. He is also my favourite one alongside Gojo, because even if they can stand alone, I believe that they are best appreciated when you think of them as the story's yin and yang. So, in a way, this is the other half of my Gojo video where I'll explore the philosophical and psychological concepts behind the curse known as Suguru Geto, going over his plot and how the fight with Takaba beautifully ties everything together and gives his story a sense of closure that I didn't expect. By the end of this video, I hope to shine a light on what makes him so special to me. With all that said, are you ready? Let's begin. In my Gojo video, I talked about two ideas, the collective consciousness and the collective ideal. The collective consciousness is the set of beliefs, morals, and goals a society agrees on. The collective ideal is the pillar of that system, the ultimate standard everyone unconsciously strives toward. Gojo is that ideal. He embodies what it means to be the strongest, creating the measuring stick for every other sorcerer. In their world, he's what everyone aspires to be. The closer someone fits that image, the more they're valued by society and effectively by individuals, but every bright ideal casts a dark shadow. Psychologists like Carl Jung call this the collective shadow. All the traits we reject, deny, or bury to keep our ideals looking clean. Not to be confused with a personal shadow. The parts of ourselves we repress. That's what Yuji Kuna mostly represents in the story. Quick side note. If it was intentional, then it's brilliant that Yuji ingests a single, concentrated embodiment of unadulterated individualism, an overwhelming sense of self, and a complete disregard for others, while Geto absorbs society's curses, becoming the embodiment of the collective shadow. Both are different ways of falling into the dark side of humanity. Absolute cinema. And when you understand that both of them consume curses for what appears to be a noble reason, yet are also driven by a buried desire to be the strongest, it's kind of like the difference between, I want to be a richer person so I can feed my family, and I want to be the richest person so I can feed my family. The second one has your identity, the title of the richest, or in their case, the strongest, wrapped up inside the seemingly selfless desire to protect the weak. It's a subtle but important distinction, and it explains why we sometimes can't recognize when our actions aren't as noble as they sound, creating a blind spot within ourselves. At the expense of getting ahead of myself, the moment I got my aha confirmation about this entire theory was when Gojo commented on how Sukuna got so close to the person inhabiting Geto. Because of how deeply intertwined the personal shadow and the collective unconscious are in theory, watching them get explicitly connected was really, really cool. Now, I know what you're going to say. All of this sounds very Western, and my response to that is, no, you sound very Western. I'm kidding, let me explain why I use a Jungian lens for my Jujutsu Kaisen analysis. Jujutsu Kaisen is a spiritual successor to Devilman, and Devilman is a story that's innately Freudian and Jungian. Go Nagai literally name drops both of them in Devilman Lady and goes so far down the rabbit hole, he even tries to explain synchronicity like a kid who just learnt a really cool, edgy word. I actually have a video essay where I go through the parallels between the two series, but when you look at the core trope Devilman explores, the dark side of humanity, it makes sense why it is the author's go-to. On top of that, Jungian psychology also works really well with Buddhism because Jung himself was such a fan, so using it for JJK was a no-brainer, and needless to say, it has massively paid off. For your information, in Devilman, the personal shadow is represented through Amon, the demon Akira carries, while Ryo/Satan embodies the collective shadow. Now, the final concept, enantiodromia, is the emergence of the unconscious opposite over time. To quote Carl Jung, in whatever form the opposites appear in the individual, at bottom it is always a matter of a consciousness lost and obstinately stuck in one-sidedness, confronted with the image of instinctive wholeness and freedom, who, compensating and correcting our one-sidedness, emerges from the darkness and shows us how and where we have deviated from the basic pattern and crippled ourselves psychically. He continues, so long as these are kept apart, naturally for the purpose of avoiding conflict, they do not function and remain inert. Can you see it? Can you see the vision? This is why I'll die on the hill that this panel right here is the most important. No, it is the thesis of JJK. Never mind that it explains this same concept in 3 sentences, but it did so in such a simplified and clean way that it is kind of hard not to have respect for Akutami, especially when you tie it to the characters and plot, and you can tell that this was the foundation of their work from the very beginning to the very end. When I first learned about enantiodromia a couple of months back, so many things clicked for me, specifically what Utahime and Mei were talking about during the opening scene of Hidden Inventory, about running to the opposites to break the cycle. On a plot level, Gojo and Geto are going on their ideological opposites, which was the beginning of the breaking the cycle movement we see in the main series when Gojo took it upon himself to change the system after Geto defaulted. It also gives you context of what happened with Geto and Yuji on a character level as 2 people who held this almost idealistic extreme moral standing only to swing the other way when under extreme stress. Alright, lesson over. This is the last character in the series that has this much textbook theory. Now, please sit back, relax, and let's bring it all together with how it was done in the series. If curses are the negative emotions of humanity, then Geto, by eating them, quite literally becomes the collective shadow made flesh, a walking container for everything society refuses to face. He described the taste as swallowing a rag used to wipe vomit, and in the anime they take it even further by adding shit. Both vomit and feces are involuntary reflexes, the body expelling what it cannot accept, kind of like curses. Sorcerers are that rag. They're the ones forced to clean up society's waste with little acknowledgement or regard for their well-being. We even use the same imagery in real life when we're trying to express extreme contempt or rejection. And that exact disgust is what the villagers project onto those girls, something he is painfully familiar with. This is why the anime's decision to move this scene to the very beginning of the season, instead of toward the end, and to add the shot of the girls walking in oversized shoes after being saved by Geto, is such a strong directorial choice. It sets up what the rest of the arc will explore, how someone with seemingly unshakable ideals reaches the point where he lashes out at people weaker than him, and the reason behind it is far more complex than simple hatred for non-sorcerers, which we will come back to later once we finish laying the foundation. To understand the message, we must recognize Japan's collectivist culture, which prioritizes the group's needs and goals over individual interests, emphasizing harmony, interdependence, and social cohesion, where individuals identify deeply with their in-groups and actions are guided by a duty to the collective. Consequently, individualistic behaviors like openly confronting someone are frowned upon for making one stand out. Geto originally represents these ideals, telling Gojo it is the duty of the strong to protect the weak and keep the strong in check, a clear reflection of traditional standards which he was upholding. Although Geto may unconsciously see the weak as lesser, he feels a powerful obligation to protect them. Interestingly, the manga portrays him with certainty in this conviction, while the anime adds a hint of doubt in his words. If you subscribe to the visual reading that the basketball is meant to symbolize curse absorption, the moment he stares at the ball, the symbol of a curse, feels like he is questioning his own words, as if he doesn't fully believe them. This was also pointed out by Mei, who noted that Geto was unconsciously insulting Utahime by implying she was the kind of weak person they were talking about. One of my favourite parts about the arc being called Premature Death is that, in a lot of ways, we witness the premature death of many people. Riko, Haibara, and the innocence of Gojo and Geto. Watching everything unfold felt like going down a spiral staircase, a series of unfortunate events that ends with everything collapsing under the weight of pressure. I want to make it really clear before I begin that this is going over each step that led us to the point of no return. None of it should be taken as validation or justification. But I'm going over this because when people talk about Geto, they simplify the journey, which robs us of having a good, honest conversation. Step 0 would be what we already just covered. Geto's feelings towards those who are weak are unconsciously felt, or at the very least, buried beneath all that reasoning and responsibility. Step 1, be Gojo's words, if there was already the possibility of that potential. By saying the words that cursed him, being righteous, I hate that stuff. Applying reasoning and responsibility to Jujutsu is what weak people do, solidifying the belief that not only is it a bother to look after the weak, but that if you do this, you are weak. So part of me believes that a reason why Geto couldn't open up about things with Gojo was the fear of being seen as weak. After all, he did lose to someone with no curse energy. But it doesn't stop there, Gojo also adds. Are you lonely? Go by yourself.
Watched a movie that drops ominous hints about the fate of one or more of its characters, then you've probably already experienced foreshadowing.
And I think what adds to the tragedy is that everything happened unconsciously. If he had known the effect those words would have, he probably wouldn't have said them even if he felt them, which is an essential part of growing up. And life, unfortunately, is like that, right? There are things we say or do in anger, maybe even a joke that changed our relationship with someone permanently. Because even when Gojo showed genuine concern for his well-being and asked him directly, he wasn't honest about his struggles until it was too late. Let's talk about Geto's biggest flaw, his rigid worldview. You can see it early on in the way he talks to Gojo about his beliefs, but it's most evident in his conversation with a Q member, when the man panics and says, I'll quit being a curse user, I'll go back to the countryside and grow rice. Geto replies, a curse user, a rice farmer? As if, to him, once you've chosen a path, there's no turning back. A curse user can't stop being a curse user, just as a sorcerer can't escape their role. It's an absolute way of seeing the world, people fixed by their choices, unable to change. That idea echoes what Yuji later calls the roles everyone plays, when in truth the world of Jujutsu is far more complicated. Geto's refusal to see this, to accept that people can fall and still come back, that you can stop being a sorcerer, keeps him trapped in contradictions that harden into resentment. It is also worth noting that Gojo was Geto's safety net as much as Geto was to Gojo in the morality department. They were the strongest because they were able to fulfill what the other lacked. And the problem with relying on safety nets without having a strong foundation is that in its absence, you are left to stare at that void that will stare right back, and it doesn't solve the problem. It postpones it. He also felt like he didn't deserve to be fine after failing the mission and breaking his promise to protect Riko. But as the series later shows, none of them should have been on missions like that to begin with. Strength or skill doesn't justify robbing someone of their youth by assigning more responsibilities than they are mentally, physically, or emotionally prepared for. This is why ending the series with a mission that's so easy felt like such a good choice to me, especially after how hard it was to watch all the previous ones. Then we see the confrontation with the darkness of humanity as a collective behind those red doors in the basement. I love how the anime portrayed his shadow growing larger and larger as Gojo walks away carrying Amanai's body. To me, it signaled the moment Geto's hatred began to grow, still contained by rationality and his sense of duty. After all, the ones responsible had already fled. Gojo asks him, "Does it always need to be a reason?" To which he responds, "Yes, it is very important there is one, especially for a sorcerer." Then we watch him begin to spiral mentally. The question, who am I doing this for, starts to take over his mind. These are the people he risks his life for. The way the water drop sound subtly transitions into applause perfectly represents how invasive that resentment becomes. And we hear it again later when he talks to Yuki. He's given one last reminder of what he's supposed to be through Haibara, who becomes his final moral safety net. Geto asks, "Do you think you can keep being a sorcerer? Isn't it rough for you?" He responds with, "I don't think too deeply about it. It just feels nice to me to do my best in the things I can do," showing someone whose sense of purpose comes from within. Then Yuki interrupts to have an honest conversation with Geto, and she mentions that the reason she is doing her own thing is because she has been trying to figure out a way to eliminate curses from the root. He lets it slip. "Why don't we kill all non-sorcerers?" She responds, "I'm just not crazy enough to do that." She doesn't shut it down but acknowledges that is a potential solution. In other words, she is allowing Geto to understand that this is a real possibility for him and to make the conscious decision to do or not do it. Because at the end of the day, the only person who can decide to do what is right or wrong is the individual. She tells him there is a side of you that hates non-sorcerers and the one who rejects that idea. These are just possibilities you've found. The one you commit to will define your true feelings. Then comes Haibara's death, which is, thematically speaking, the removal of that final anchor. And with that loss, every layer of protection he had, rationality, responsibility, and now the person who was the representation of internal purpose, is stripped away. There's nothing left to counterbalance the resentment that has been festering inside him since that day. So when the next mission comes, The one in the countryside, Geto enters it already cracked, already exhausted, already carrying more than anyone his age should. And that's exactly where everything finally breaks. He finds himself facing the same kind of darkness he encountered with the religious group. Non-sorcerers were abusing 2 children whose parents were implied to be killed because they were curse users, blaming them for the curses. When he tried to explain that it wasn't their fault, they doubled down using reason and responsibility to justify their actions. Even the death of her grandson was pinned on them, and when the girls tried to explain that the real culprit was the man, they were shouted down. I also want to remind everyone that Akutami has given us another point of view of how things are in the countryside, coming from Nobara's backstory with Saori. The countryside's cruelty drove Saori away, yet Nobara escaped instead of turning bitter and seeking revenge, which brings me back to Geto. He could have saved the girls and run, but instead, consumed by exhaustion and hatred, he made the worst choice imaginable. He snaps, he burns the countryside to the ground. In doing so, he renounces his role as a sorcerer and embraces life as a curse user. He becomes the opposite of what he used to be. This scene right here is also a direct mirror of Gojo's indifference by saying that he wouldn't feel anything. The feeling of, should we kill them all, is there too. Only this time no one is there to stop him. I couldn't help but think of Junpei's conversation with Mahito. Do you think that the person who said, if the opposite of love isn't hate but indifference, must be burning in hell? And Mahito tells him that humans love a good play on words and making excuses, because both are bad. Akutami's message isn't, it wasn't me, it still came from me. That regardless of the circumstances, there were innocent human lives lost, and that is the real tragedy. And the more we are okay with human lives being lost, the less value we hold for them. So, to me, Geto's and Yuji's story is a cautionary tale of what happens when we try to pretend the dark part of us isn't there, bringing out an extreme opposite when our backs are against the wall. We give up on ourselves and refuse to rely on others. We convince ourselves we can rationalize everything until the safeguards we've built collapse, leaving us to commit irreversible acts because we are not willing to address and understand that those feelings are part of us, instead of trying to push them away and pretend they are not there. And when Gojo tried to understand him, the words didn't come out right. He ended up telling Geto that his way was impossible. A strong parallel to this is Yuji's interaction with Junpei. Yuji also responds from a place of moral certainty rather than emotional understanding. He begins harshly, insisting on what he believes is right and wrong, and it is only when he lowers his guard and listens to the pain manifesting through violence that he grasps the root of Junpei's suffering, even though, in both cases, it may have already been too late. This is why I adore Akutami's fractal writing so much. You see the same emotional pattern refracted through different characters, each responding in slightly different ways, each becoming a kind of trial and error in the search for the right emotional answer we finally see at the end. This brings us to JJK0, where we witness the final stage of someone whose heart and mind have been slowly poisoned. Even Gojo's final attempt, "Are you leaving? Not on my watch," is met with Geto's refusal. It feels as though he had already decided he was too far gone, as if he genuinely believed everyone, even his best friend, had given up on him. But Gojo, Yaga, and even Nanami never stopped hoping he wouldn't be the one causing harm, or at the very least could not bring themselves to blame him for his past transgressions until he openly declared war and showed that there was no saving. One of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire movie is when Geto watches Yuta and his friends risk their lives for one another. He says, "Sorcerers risking their lives to save another sorcerer. The world I longed for, right before my very eyes." He is in tears as he says it, which to me was the equivalent of,
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Because just as we saw with Yuta, but mainly with Yuji, where he protected both from the seemingly imminent death they were sentenced to, there is no doubt in my mind that Gojo would have protected his one and only best friend if he had allowed himself to be saved. When he later admits he couldn't be truly happy from the bottom of his heart in this world, and when he says he didn't realize Gojo still felt a connection to him, it makes me wonder how long that emptiness had been building. Did it begin at KFC, when he started taking missions alone? From that moment in the basement? In that panel he is walking by himself, and that visual detail suggests to me that he had felt alone back then. Now let's move to the final evolution of Geto, from the representation of the collective shadow to something more primal. The collective unconscious, a term introduced by Carl Jung, represents the deepest layer of the psyche, the part of the mind containing memories and impulses not born from personal experience, but shared by humanity as a whole. In other words, they are inherited. Fun fact, in the fan book, instead of putting Kenjaku, they simply drew over Geto's name, and they refer to him as Geto or Geto Kenjaku, which gave me even more reason not to separate him from his vessel. The collective unconscious contains archetypes, universal, primordial images and ideas. The two I'm going to cover are the trickster and the mother, which are discussed in great detail in the book The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. Jung identified the trickster as a foundational archetype representing the collective shadow, the embodiment of traits rejected by both the individual and society. He described it as a paradoxical, primitive figure, both divine and animal, inferior yet superior to man. Seeing the archetypes of chaos as necessary, using humour, rule-breaking and disruption to expose folly, challenge rigid order, and ultimately facilitate transformation and expanded consciousness. And to me, that is really cool, because knowing this, it makes sense why Kenjaku initiated the culling games, why they informed the American government about the existence of curses to make the point that outside forces are not the answer to inherently Japanese issues, and most importantly, why Geto as a curse manipulator was such a fitting vessel for him. Instead of exercising curses, he let them grow, accumulate, and develop through experience before absorbing them. These curses are 1, the curse that represents the fear and hatred of humankind, and 2, the curses that represent the pre-confrontation with the shadow for each character, Jogo with Yuji Kuna to then fight against Megumi, Megumi with Dagon to then fight against Toji, ending with Yuji Kuna, Gojo with Hanami to then see Pseudo Geto. Again, this could all be a coincidence, but personally I don't think that is the case. The mother archetype represents the nurturing, life-giving and protective aspects of the feminine principle. This archetype shapes our unconscious sense of safety, belonging and trust in the world. The shadow of the great mother is the death mother. The dead mother wields a cold, fierce, violent and corrosive power. So Yuji, as the offspring of the corrupted great mother and a loving father, creates that duality within him, the very thing that made him a 1 in a million vessel. And the fact that this information didn't come from the grandfather, but from the unconscious, in a dream. Very demure. This brings us to the resolution. Pseudo Geto versus Takaba's fight. I want to activate my Hear Me Out card and tell you that Takaba is a direct mirror to Geto. One is a failed comedian, the other a failed sorcerer. I swear to God, read chapter 146, then from chapter 240 to 243. And you will see what I mean. Instead of comedy, think about being the strongest. He is told that he's too old and should just quit. That they are people in the industry who are late bloomers or people who suddenly take off, but they were amusing from the start and you are not one of them, and told him to do something that is most suitable for him. Then maybe it's the manager or a senior comedian who says, both of you misunderstand. There are 2 kinds of people who are on demand. Those who are funny and those who can misunderstand they are funny. Side note, I noticed in the hidden inventory opening how Geto's face was completely banged up while Gojo's wasn't as bad. And to me it hinted at that particular level of discrepancy between the two, from the one who was the strongest and the one who misunderstood that he was the strongest. In other words, there is a discrepancy between his self-perception and reality. And that is scary when it happens, right? When you have pride in something or you're trying really hard to be good at something because you believe in yourself, only to have life, time and time again remind you that you're not cut out for that one specific role. It sucks. For every success story, for every Jimmy Fallon, Mr. Beast, PewDiePie and Gigag, hundreds of thousands of shattered dreams of people who thought they had potential and tried until reality showed up to tell them otherwise. Watching your childhood dreams sort of get shut down is something the majority of the collective experiences. So what is the solution? Take time to discover. Take time to try different roles. That's what the Takaba fight said to me. As someone who looked at the university counselor dead in the eyes and told them that I wanted to be an athletic trainer. And when they asked me, like they asked anyone, what is your plan B? I confidently told them there is no plan B. It can be demoralizing to watch what you thought you wanted not be what you thought it would be. So, watching Pseudo Geto be a nurse, a squad leader, roles that are in the position of saving other people's lives without having to be the strongest, special, or even a sorcerer, while you're having fun and being goofy on the side. That's the best answer to fix collective discontent I've ever seen. And at the end of the journey, ending up as the biggest sorcerer in the whole wide world, a comedian who are well known for turning their negative experiences into laughter. It was hands down my favourite message in Jujutsu Kaisen. Because sure, we love it when we see stories where the protagonist has this one role and they won't let anything get in between that, but when most of us don't get to have that, I think the message, well then you have a little discovery journey to do, is exactly what we need to hear.
We all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?